Hi, everyone. This is BritSimon. So, a number of people have asked me a similar question. It's essentially about Trump. What if Trump gets into the White House? What if he becomes president of the USA? What could he do to stop the DV lottery? So, if you're interested in understanding that, just stick with me for a few minutes, and we'll talk about it. Now, I recorded this particular video a couple of times. I don't script my comments. I tend to come, in front of the camera and just talk, right? And unfortunately, with Trump's an emotional subject, a bit of a trigger for me. I'm not a fan, and so it's difficult for me to keep my comments sort of focused and on track without sort of, going into little bits of political commentary. And I don't intend to make this a political video. You may like Trump. If you do, I don't understand, I have to say, but never mind. You might like Trump, and you might think that Trump has a realistic chance of becoming president again. And on that latter point, I would agree. There is a realistic chance that he could become president. Last week, when Biden was saying he wasn't going to step back, I was actually very concerned and pretty much settled in my mind that Trump was going to win. Now, Biden has said he's not going to run again and has nominated Kamala Harris. The dynamic has changed a bit. I think there's a good chance that Harris could actually beat Trump in the election, but we'll see. Right, so we'll see what will happen. Quick thing on timing, first of all. The election will take place on November 3rd of this year. It's always that date, and then the swearing in of the new president, whoever that is, would happen on January the 20th of 2025. So if let's kind of assume in this video, let's assume that Trump wins. When is the first point at which he would be able to influence policy and make changes? It would be January the 20th, 2025, right? So that's the first point that we need to know. Second point is the president in the USA is not a king or a queen. The president has to work with Congress and with the Supreme Court. And there are three branches of government that are designed to keep each other in check to some extent. So the president has some powers, but if the president wants to change laws, then he has to go through Congress to change a law, and then eventually he can sign a law in order to enact it. So some people have asked, can Trump simply wipe out the DV lottery? And my sort of top line answer for that is no, he can't do that. He can't stop the DV lottery by just saying he wants to stop it. The DV lottery is part of immigration law. It can and will continue until immigration law is changed to stop the DV lottery, or some sort of negotiation where they prefer some other form of immigration for the majority of cases that are non-DV. I think people in DV world overestimate the importance of DV for immigration as a whole. You have to understand that well over 1 million people each year emigrate to the USA and get green cards, and 50K a year or so will come through the DV program. So that's only 5% of the overall budget at most of green cards come through the DV program. It's just not an important part of the immigration world out there, right? But nevertheless, it's the part that we're all concerned with, and so it feels more important to us, right? But it is possible in some sort of future legal change for immigration as a whole that diversity visa lottery gets impacted in some way, particularly if Trump gets in, because he has talked against the DV lottery before. And it is possible that they could find some sort of consensus agreement to remove DV lottery. But if that happens, that takes a whole process of law change, etc. It's very difficult to get through, and it would take some time. So there's no way that law change would come quickly. And you can guarantee that DV 2025 is going to be unaffected from a law change in its period of time, because it can't go that quickly. In fact, I don't think any legal change could could affect DV25 or DV26. I think DV26 will go ahead unaffected also. So that's from a law change point of view, from a legal change that changes the way the law states. Now, what else can a president do? Well, a president can influence the way things happen, or decide the way things happen within the parameters of the law. So the law says the DV program is part of our immigration budget, but the president is given certain powers to say how immigration is controlled on a day-to-day basis, right? So during COVID, the President Trump at the time, basically shut down immigration, and because there was this huge, big problem of the pandemic, COVID pandemic, not well understood at the time, certainly not well understood by Trump. We didn't have vaccines, there was a lot of fear created, a lot of information that it was going to be a very serious pandemic, and it was a very serious pandemic, right? In some countries, particularly in Africa, I noticed COVID went almost sort of unnoticed in a sense. Well, that's because in some of those countries, the population is much younger than in the USA. But where our population is much older, and older people and people with comorbidities were more affected by COVID, there was a much bigger concern here, and there was a big impact. 1 million Americans died from COVID in the USA out of 300 million. It was tremendously impactful here. So even if you didn't think COVID was a big deal where you were, it was a big deal in America. And so to an extent, Trump was possibly right in sort of a heavy-handed approach in shutting down the borders for a while. But of course, he saw that as an opportunity because his policies are anti-immigrant, his followers are anti-immigrant. They are particularly anti-immigrants where those immigrants are brown-skinned or Muslim, if they're different to the sort of typical white-skinned American Christian, right? Strangely, they are particularly, here I go again, I've got to be careful. They are particularly concerned about that sort of immigration, shall we say. We'll just leave it at that. And so, there is a sort of a natural reliance on, or there was a natural reliance on, okay, I've got this power to stop immigration. Now, I'm going to wield that power. Eventually, that COVID sort of shutdown of immigration was stopped, and eventually it was attacked legally. It was attacked, and eventually that was stopped. It was taken away, right? Separately, before Trump was elected the first time, in 2016, when he was campaigning, he was talking about a Muslim ban. And he, one of the reasons that people, liked him, his followers liked him, because of the sort of people that they were, was because he had talked with such open happiness or whatever, saying he wanted to ban Muslims. And some people like that, right? Again, I'm not going to make judgments or statements about that too much, but just suffice it to say that a lot of people who follow Trump liked that sort of policy. They liked the anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric that Trump came out with. So on day one of his presidency in 2017, he implemented a ban which was essentially the Muslim ban that he had talked about. That was then attacked from a legal point of view. It caused some difficulties, caused some problems, but it was attacked and fought. And it went through a total of 3 iterations. The first Muslim ban was attacked and removed. Second was removed also. And then they did a third ban, which was dressed up as a security concern because of people from terrorist countries who, coincidentally, the list of terrorist countries we came up with as a country, apparently, were all Muslim countries, right? So it's Muslim terrorism we're concerned about, apparently. other terrorists are just fine. And that third version of the ban was allowed to stay in place. The Supreme Court allowed it to stay in place. And it was eventually only removed once Joe Biden came into power, right? And so this is an example that both the COVID ban and the Muslim bans were examples of a thing called executive orders. So this was the president wielding the president's power to work within the laws that are already created, supposedly, to administer the country on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't require a law change if the laws have some aspect of presidential ability to shut down immigration, for example, or to implement more stringent security requirements, which is what the Muslim ban turned into. It was a more stringent security situation. Also, the DS 5535 came from that era also, which again was more enhanced security checks. So, the president is allowed to implement executive orders. Those executive orders can be challenged if they are considered to be unlawful. Other people can take a view on that. But then that argument goes to courts, through courts, etc., and perhaps on to the Supreme Court. And that can take time. In the short term, those executive orders by the president can cause difficulties, right? So what am I essentially saying? I'm saying, look, that President Trump can't, and certainly not very quickly, can't change the laws and therefore stop the DV program that way. But he can implement certain executive orders, and if he does it the right way, if he carefully crafts those orders in a careful way, a more considerate way than some of the ones that he's done, then those laws could be, those executive orders could be considered lawful and therefore be allowed to stay in place. And so he could cause some chaos. We don't know for sure that he will. He hasn't made any statements about what he's going to do on day one with regard to immigration, but in general, it's clear that he is still on the same anti-immigration perspective that he was before. So it is a worry. If Trump gets in, it probably will give us some difficulties. Those difficulties may be lawsuits, may cause lawsuits, but nothing can be fixed overnight, right? So he can do something, it causes difficulties, and so even if you fight that from a legal point of view, it still causes some damage, right? So how do you operate in a world like that? Well, number one, let's not worry about it until it's happened, right? Trump hasn't been elected yet. The election will be known in November. DV 2025 will be progressing. If you get your DV 2025 visa, then, and that happens before January 20th, you're certainly going to be unaffected by this whole thing, by Trump. Although I would suggest that you consider emigrating to America as fast as possible, right? At least make your entry as fast as possible. Because we did get into a position under COVID where people with visas were not allowed to enter. Now, that was because of the pandemic, right? But still, there's a situation that can be created where he could say, well, even though you've got a visa, we're going to slow that down. So if you get processed in October, November, December, or early January, and you get your visa, then just from a common sense point of view, if you see that Trump has been elected in November, get on the plane quickly, right? Just, use some reasonable common sense to do that. If, however, you're a DV 2025 candidate and you think your interview is going to be later, generally speaking, I would say this: if you're from a non-Muslim majority country, you're probably going to be unaffected. If you're from a Muslim majority country, if you're from that sort of background, if that country has links to terrorism and that sort of thing, you may well be affected. And you have to sort of be realistic about that. So watch very carefully for what happens in the election. And if you've got any influence at all with friends in the USA, tell them to vote for the opponent of Trump, not Trump, right? Because if Trump gets back in, all of that sort of chaos could start again. Now, none of this means, by the way, that the Democrats are perfect when it comes to immigration. Biden has not been perfect about immigration. And he also made certain sort of encouraging statements about the DV lottery, but never followed through on any of that. And so it's not that the Democrats are perfect for immigration either, right? It's just that they're less hateful than Trump and that side of politics, right? So they are less biased and less likely to do overtly aggressive and bad things directly towards immigrants just because they're immigrants. But the sort of laissez-faire approach and lack of control that has come from the Democrats also isn't ideal, right? So we need to see better immigration policies coming out from the future Democrat administration that I hope we end up with. But we'll see. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers what Trump can cause, what concerns Trump can cause, etc. It really hinges on whether or not, firstly, he's elected on November 3rd. It's not a done deal, right? And I think if you compare Harris to Trump, if they are allowed to debate, or if they have a debate, Harris is going to wipe the floor with Trump because she's a smart cookie. She wouldn't have been my first choice for presidential candidate, for sure. But she's certainly good enough to wipe the floor with Trump. Trump's dopey as hell. Here we go again. I'm starting again. But it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to watch this campaign. And we don't have to wait too long till November 3rd. We'll probably know the results either on November 4th or maybe November 5th or 6th. And then we have some time to prepare by January 20th. So, okay. So now you know. I hope that was interesting to you. I hope I was reasonably fair and didn't involve too much politics, although it's very difficult, as I say, to totally, sort of insulate myself from my feelings, as it were, with regard to that particular person and that whole way of thinking. Look, I stand for immigrants, right? I've done that for a dozen years. It's very difficult to watch someone come along and awaken all of the anti-immigrant hatred that there is from some people in this country. There is that aspect. About 30% of this country's voting population would vote for Trump regardless of what he does, right? And that kind of tells you everything you need to know. But there are some people who would never vote for Trump, and there is a bunch of people in the middle who will literally decide the election outcome one way or the other. They'll either side more towards the Democrat candidate or they'll side more towards Trump. And it's those thinkers in the middle that we need to influence, right? And hopeful. Okay, everybody, have a great day. Hope that was interesting and helpful for you. All right, bye-bye now.